Hi, everyone. Welcome to The Tilt. Today, we're lucky to have Dr. Gor Samvel join us. He's from Yerevan. He holds a PhD in international law and is an international law expert, currently serving as a postdoctoral research fellow at the Arctic University of Norway. He's been a visiting scholar at Duke University Law School and a member of the compliance committee under the UN Economic Commission of Europe's PRTR protocol, contributing to international environmental governance and policy. So great to have you today. Thank you for joining us.
Hello, Andre. Thank you very much. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure.
Okay, so the reason I was very keen to talk to you was just to give this a little bit of context, was that in Armenia recently, there's been some developments, quite controversial developments, it seems, where the government of Republic of Armenia has been feuding with a billionaire who owned majority owner of the Armenian electricity network. And also, obviously, things to do with the church. There's been some allegations of foul play. So the reason I was keen to speak to you specifically was because I think it'd be a really good time to get a more nuanced view of how the judicial system in Armenia works, specifically around questions of independence and separation of powers. So how you, having been in that system, for quite some time, how you see it from the inside out, a view that not many other people get to see.
Okay. Thank you very much for the question. I think that to be able to answer your question about the specificities of the independence of judicial system, I have to a little bit go back to the very idea of what do we understand by saying the independent judicial system? What does that mean, right? In the first place. And then only afterwards to just sort of break it down in a way that we reach to the level of the involvement of judiciary in the politics. And I think that the general idea in law about the judicial independence is that we are striving to have a system where the judges can make their decisions and issue judgments free of any influence. So free of influence from the government, from parliament, from the other branches of the power, from media, from private actors, and etc. and etc. So that's the general image of the judicial independence. But it also means that we set up a process that helps to elect judges in a way that they are afterwards more or less free in their decision making, and that we have guarantees to ensure that they are actually sort of removed from office only under the circumstances that are described in law, so that are enshrined in law. So that's the general picture of the judicial independence, right? It sounds very ideal. It's just like almost an objective that you have to strive constantly, because it's like chasing a wind. You can't really, sense it, you can feel it, but you can never really achieve it because there is always something to be done. And there's always factors intervening in the judicial independence.
Right. So that's sort of the ideal goal, is the judgments and the judges who get, who are put on the bench are independent and objective, and they make these decisions without influence coming in from, different parts of government or the media, as you said. So that's the thing that the judicial independence is striving for, but it's sort of imperfect and it doesn't really ever reach that point.
Yes, because exactly, you summarized it perfectly. Because I think when we have created in the profession this perfect view of the judiciary, it was done at a certain point in time because there was a need to strive for this kind of independence. There was a need to create these checks and balances between different parts of the power. But then over time, the profession, the legal scholarship came to the conclusion that this is not really a correct representation of the judiciary. And we are actually presenting a myth that does not really exist in reality. So how are we going to demystify the judicial system in a way that we still retain respect towards it, but at the same time tell the society that you cannot sort of fall victim constantly to beliefs or to sort of objectives that are not never going to be achieved. So I think on one hand, saying that the judiciary is completely not independent, that it's always about politics, that it's always influenced by different factors, and etc. and etc. So we don't really have a independent judiciary. I think that's another sort of extreme. The other extreme is to say that the judiciary is actually sort of very independent. It adheres only to the rule of law, and it's is that the answer is not somewhere in between. But the answer is in finding a way to sort of reconstitute every time judicial system in a way that it survives the political and economic and other shocks. Because when those issues, when the systems try, for example, we can see it in many legal systems now, in Armenia, particularly in the US, in other places, the whole global system is going through a very tense and moment. So when you go through this, the judicial system is not immune to it. So how do you sort of make sure that even under that kind of political pressure, it's still able to deliver certain balance, and be that in distribution or in human rights and etc. So I think that's the way of sort of going about the understanding of judicial independence. And there are different myths, of course, but I will just underline the two of them. First is the myth that judiciary is basically operating just on the basis of law. That it's just there is a law, the judges read the law, and they start to apply that law. I think it's a mythical view because, first of all, they have their own biases. They're operating in the context. And most importantly, judges not only apply the law, but they also make a law. And they also give sometimes a very broad interpretation to the law. And most importantly, in some instances, they make also ideological choices before applying the law. So, for example, if you're sitting in the US court and you have to make a decision about, let's say, the women's reproductive rights, you make a choice. Where are you going in the first place, right? In which direction? Are you of a more conservative view, or do you hold to more liberal views? And then afterwards, you make your decisions and the interpretation of law accordingly. So now let's go back to the Armenian context. I think it is not really sort of unknown or surprise or controversial to say that after 2018 revolution, or whatever we want to call it, some people don't like the idea that it was a revolution. So the events of 2018, we are having a situation when there is an immense pressure on the judicial system, because some actors in the political system consider that it's a really not an independent system, that it has been for years corrupt. And so there is a need for sort of interventions. There were, of course, claims to have to have the government intervene more than it's actually doing now. But I think that this is a reality in which it operates. So, of course, if there are cases in front of it, the judicial system, first of all, feels this pressure coming on it. And the second of all, I think, which is very important, that they are actually before a very hard choices. That's my opinion. That it's really difficult to sort of position yourself, because there is a whole geopolitical transformation going on in Armenia or in the region, etc. And it filters down to the level of the individual judge sometimes.
Okay. So just to sort of make sure, we're following correctly here. So it sounds like one issue is there. I'm not sure if it's just, from government or it's from the Armenian population as well. One issue is that the judicial system has been seen as potentially compromised by the individuals who are operating within it. So, I don't know, high level judges who have, some sort of decision making ability. And is the second basically that some may see the government using the judicial system basically as an arm for its own political ends? Is that something that's of concern in Armenia as well? And the only reason I ask that, just to make sure I'm understanding, because I feel a lot of the way this is reported on the news, and without giving any personal opinion of what I think might be happening, I think the news presents it as the judicial system as a extension of the government, and the way it's reported is from what this is the diaspora news. Obviously not generalizing too much. There's sort of this implication that when the judicial system does something, that it's an action from the government, that it's an action from the executive arm. Now, that might be the case. I just feel, sometimes the news, they don't give much context, or, sometimes there's a bit of learning that needs to be done before you can fully understand the story. I feel like that can be quite lacking sometimes, especially in this case. So just, what's your view on that second issue of seeing the judicial system as an extension of the executive, as opposed to working as a separate independent check on the executive?
Well, let me put it very sort of briefly, that first of all, judicial system cannot and is not in Armenia an extension of executive. That's just an over exaggeration. Second, if a decision is politically charged, it doesn't mean that it does not have a legal grounds. So if the issue brought before the court is highly political, this does not deprive that issue from its legal characteristics. If a high-profile politician is standing before the court, it does not necessarily mean that he is being sort of prosecuted for just political reasons without any legal grounds. So if you get yourself into politics and then start claiming that, well, I'm out of politics, well, it doesn't really work like that, right? So that's just the very brief answer to your question. So there might be political element, and there might be also the use of judiciary by the government for certain purposes, but that issue is not within that particular case, but that issue is within the selectiveness of the sort of prosecutor office or other institutions or the government, in the way that they choose to go after one and not the other. Right? So when I choose that I have to go after Karapetyan, but there are an identical instance next to it, and I'm choosing not to prosecute them, that means that I am doing a political choice. But as a court, I am receiving a case where I have to look into legal grounds of that case. I cannot tell the government or the prosecutor's office or whatever is that I am thinking as a judge to be selective, that, well, I'm going to just decline this case because I think that you are just doing a selection which is, which is not just, or which goes against the constitution, etc., etc. I am not an instance of constitutional justice. So, and this goes to the very idea, the very idea of the relationships of law and politics, and judges being also part of the politics. So in this way, the judicial system becomes part of it, but it doesn't mean like the whole political process, but it does not necessarily mean that if you are within the political process, you are acting illegally. So the same way you can act legally within the political process, but you can exercise such level of discretion that it amounts almost to illegality, though you keep the formal process, but you exercise your discretion in a way that it's evident that you are not really sort of following the rule of law, its principles. Let me bring you an example if you want to, if you're interested. So I think there was a moment then if I'm remembering correctly, it was 2021. There was this election of 2 judges to the Cassation Court of Armenia. If I'm not mistaken, it was Hakyant Armen and Arsen Torosyan, Makarchan, I'm sorry. So the two judges to be elected to the court, to the bench. Then, well, the majority in the parliament didn't show up for the election. So they sort of boycotted it. But the reason, I think it was Makunz, the head of this My Step parliamentary fraction, she said that we are doing this as a sign, as an expression of a protest, not against the judge, like the candidates for the judges, but we are doing it against the head of the Judicial Council, which was by then Ruben Bartazarian, if I'm not mistaken. No, I think I'm saying his name. Anyways, that they wanted to remove from office. So I think this is a classic example of using the power in a way, your discretion in a way that is just not fitting any principle of constitutional process. Because you bring the judges there, you are supposed to elect them, and you're not supposed to, you know what I mean, right? You're not supposed to go and say, well, I mean, I'm not going to participate in your election because I want to get just like not really unrelated processes.
As in which I think, I can sort of think of other examples where this, denial to participate is a form of political protest, which, I think looking from the outside and having an understanding from, other countries' parliamentary systems, it's basically the way that you participating is your voice and it's your ability to make change. So I think it sounds like by boycotting that process, you're sort of in a way, I guess, speaking to either contempt for these types of democratic processes or to some sort of larger, disagreement. Or to me, it seems almost petulant. It's like, well, I don't get my way, so I'm not going to play with you guys today, sort of thing. Is that how you see it, or do you see some sort of deeper meaning or deeper strategy or something going on behind the scenes?
Well, to be honest, that's exactly what I meant when I said it. So, like, because I don't like the way you play it, I'm not participating, and this is not my way of playing. So, I'm not going to talk about adjusting myself to the rules so that everybody is able to play. But then also, when you are asking this question, I was just thinking now that, when you have an established legal process by constitution and by constitutional laws and etc., and you go through the process, you have to recognize, because the law, when you listen to it and read it carefully, you can really sense that it gives you certain, like it's almost sort of a channel through which you go.
Mm.
And it channels you. It gives you where to start, how to do it, and etc. And when you do this kind of deviations, you know that you are abusing your discretion. And that is not really relevant. It's not about relevance, but it's actually against, or it distorts the situation, and it undermines the rule of law, the image of it. Because I
Right.
think a lot of time we are not really understanding that what we are doing by fighting for example, the independent judicial system, how do we actually, in that process, harm the image or the perception of law in itself?
Right. And
Yeah.
just to add to that point, so when I look at it from a policy or a governance perspective, and I think just to expound on this because it might not be clear to everyone, the perception of these powers is very important too, right? Which I think is what you're getting at. It's not just whether there is actual corruption, it's whether the
Yeah.
people believe there is corruption. So if they do certain actions that might lead to, things not being transparent or things not being legitimate, that's just as bad as there actually being corruption in the government. So it sounds like what you're saying is that's, obviously applies to the judiciary as well. And that by, people not participating in the framework which is created by the law and the constitution, they are basically showing contempt for that framework. So that might be, devaluing it in the eyes of the population or the other people who rely on that framework?
Thank you so much, because you're pointing to a very important aspect of this whole discourse about judicial independence that I really want us to discuss. So, now we are talking about the independence of judiciary. For years, we were told that Armenia's judicial system is corrupt. It is not independent. And now we have the same discourse going on and on and on and on. But do we actually know whether Armenia's judicial system is independent? I don't think we know. You know why? Because we don't have a scientific knowledge about it. So, the public perception may feel that it is not independent, which is a reliable source, right? You can trust on it. You can have different, I don't know, NGOs, non-governmental organizations, or international organizations coming to Armenia and saying that, well, your judicial system has to improve. It is not really independent. It is very corrupt. And I said, but do we for ourselves know whether Armenia's judicial system is independent or not? Because it's a measurable objective. You can really assess it, and you can really come to a conclusion whether the system is independent or not. Because, one thing is that you are told about yourself something. Another thing is that you know about yourself something. I think these are two different situations, because that outside look might be as true as the inside look. So now let me give you an example. One of the things that gets to be a lot discussed in Armenian news outlets and everywhere around the social media is the election of judges. Who was elected, who was appointed, this went here and that was removed from here to there. This one was ousted and replaced with this one. And it's nothing about the substance. I never heard any like a decision of the cassation court. If you heard about it, just correct me. I'm sure the listeners and the professional community might correct later on, but I never heard any decision, a substantive issue, to be discussed like broadly publicly than just the process of their appointment and etc. That's a little bit disappointing. But from here, I just want to say, yeah, of course, in the narrow professional communities, there might have been discussions. We might know that, the cassation court made this decision, which is a precedent and etc. But nothing comes out to present the judicial branch of the power. And I think they have the right to be there, to exist and be present. But what we hear on a daily basis is just the parliament and the executive. Of course, it has its reasons, because, they are more involved with the public, they are executive, and judicial branch is more modest generally. But every now and then we should hear about their decisions. And now going to the other aspect of it. For example, let's assume the appointment of judges. The system gets criticized a lot that it is not independent, because every government tries to put there in the cassation court or in other types of courts those lawyers who are more aligned to their sort of political agenda, or they are more leaning towards their convictions and etc. and etc. Where is it not happening? Tell me. The US, we have seen recently how the court became almost a battlefield of politics. Because, Trump wants to put people like and then the Democrats want their own, and etc. and etc. Those judges who have more conservative views, those who have more progressive views. From there, I can go to more like a conservative legal system, like a German system. Only recently in German parliament, they weren't able, I think, to elect a judge, because they were supposed to elect three judges to the constitutional court. And they had the same problem, because some of the parties, I don't really remember now, but they were against the election of a lawyer who had a very progressive views on the abortion rights.
Right.
But we know, right, that after recent German elections in the parliament, they have formed the coalition. So, excuse me, but what do we expect then afterwards in Armenia? Why would we expect that our election of judges would be less political? Of course, every government is trying to get somebody who is more leaning towards their ideologies.
Right. Well, that just makes me sort of more appreciative, I think, of Australia's system. Just to give a very quick example, there's been a few very high profile cases recently to do with media independence as well as issues concerning Israel and Gaza.
Yeah.
And when you do compare it to the US, which it's so highly politicized that even certain individuals or certain topics are impossible to prosecute just because of
Mm.
the context that we're in. In Australia recently, there have been a series of judgments that have gone the right way despite the pressure from Israeli lobby groups or there's certain people sometimes in the society that have been elevated so high that they can't basically be brought down. There's been a few
Yeah.
people like that who have, really idealized Australians who have proven in court to be basically liars and grifters. And the judges have pointed that out. And then
Yeah.
every subsequent appeal has been like, mate, the judgment was great. We've looked at it 3 times. You keep escalating this, and everyone keeps telling you that it's that the judgment has been correct. So
Yeah.
I think it's. I don't know much about Australia's appointment process for judges, but I feel that sort of line is very well secured here. Whereas you can see in the US, it's that line is basically disappearing. The powers are all sort of merging into one. Like, where do you think Armenia sort of lies on that spectrum, if you had to say?
Well, there are a number of issues here. I think the first one is that when we were talking about the politicization of the appointment process, I didn't mean it as a negative thing per se. It's just the way it is going on, and it's going to be always there. There is a parliament electing a member of judicial council or a judge, so there is going to be always an aspect of politics in it. But as you pointed out very correctly, in some system, this can actually lead to situations when the judiciary is not upholding law and start to please or use the system for pleasing the interests of certain groups or just or the current government or etc. So I think that if one process is political or a little bit politicized, it does not necessarily mean that those who go through this process afterwards need to be forgetting about their professional integrity or their adherence to the rule of law and trying to make the decisions to the extent possible based on their own choices without an influence and etc. So that legal rules are still standing. And I have to say that in the US, actually, even in the US, we can see many instances when the judiciary opposes, like related to this forced, how do you call it, when the
Deportation.
deportation, exactly, thank you, forced deportation and other instances where, I mean, we have seen those cases when we see that justices say, well, no, this is not going to happen. So about the Australia, I'm not really aware, but I think that this keeping the line, as you put it very nicely, is an important thing, but it's a constant process. It's not that you draw this line and it's going to be always there. And then there is a point when you are going to have an independent judiciary. And because you draw that line, no, it's just a moving, it's really like floating, and you have to be careful that it doesn't really bend towards the direction where you have an abuse of power. But I think here I want to go back again just a little bit to the idea of independence of Armenian judiciary, because I think um, when we just go beyond the election process and try to look into the rules of on which they operate, for example, I don't know, their pay, their like the procedural rules on which they make the decisions, or their safety nets, economic and social safety, and etc. and etc. And also the rules of removing them from, then we can clearly say that there has been a lot done to ensure the independence of the judiciary. Whether this is
Right.
happening in practice, then it's a matter of an of an independent assessment, and there are criteria upon which you can do this assessment. For example, you can look at the degree of implementation of the decisions of judiciary, right? For example, you can have a perfect system and then which delivers decisions, but then the government doesn't really abide
Implement. Yeah,
by
yep.
those. Yeah, they're
Yeah,
not.
abide, uphold. Yep.
Yes. So, and then is that really an independent judiciary if you ignore the decisions, especially the ones where the stakes are high and you are really feeling discomfort? Because the main threat coming to the judicial independence is from the executive branch.
Right.
And very interestingly, in Armenia, every discussion is focused on how the executive or what the executive is doing to secure the independence of judiciary. And when I'm actually listening sometimes, I'm thinking like, wow, this is really not the place to go for it.
Right.
I mean, of course, in some ways it is, but in many
Mm.
ways, it's actually not the place to ask it. In my view, it is scientifically proven that especially the countries in like Armenia that are still in transition to the democracy, are not really having a sort of a genuine inherent interest in the independence of judiciary because they still want to persuade the when your political party is not well established, the system is not operating well, you really want to persuade the society by all means that every decision you have made is correct.
Yep. Yep.
When the judge comes and tells you, well, it's actually not, you don't really like it because it really hurts your political image or your visibility because you are still not very established political system. So the
Yeah.
society is going to shift quite easily. Yeah. So in that sense, I think the independence of judiciary is a very intense and long, and you can't exhaust this topic. But I think that in terms of rules, Armenia has done a lot. In terms of the practice, it really depends where you look for. For example, if you look at the very highly politically charged decisions, etc., you might come to conclusion that it's not really independent. When you measure, for example, the decisions concerning, like, I don't know, the family law or corporate, in some fields of corporate law, contractual law, or the administrative law, then you might actually see that, for example, in 60% of cases or 70% of cases, the judges acted just exactly as law required. And then you
Right.
go and see whether it is implemented or not. So, I mean, to me, if I want to conclude, I would just say that we simply don't know. Nobody knows whether Armenia's judicial system is independent or not.
Okay.
That is very disappointing, but it's a very good starting point. We can sort of speculate, there are NGOs, different organizations who are looking at different aspects of it. For example, suggesting that there needs to be improvement in the election process of the judicial council and etc. And it's
Mm.
we need at some point to sit down and do an assessment and to understand for ourselves how independent, and most importantly, there's a lot of discussions about the independence of judiciary, but what matters is the idea of them not being independent, because that's your starting point. If you want to talk about the independence of judiciary or measure it, you first of all need to define for yourself what is an independent judiciary. What do you consider to be an independent judiciary?
It's so interesting because I feel like this sort of ability to sit down and lay out a criteria and a groundwork for a future, direction, it applies to so many different parts of, Armenia's government, where it just doesn't have the strategic direction, or it's not, telling people what the strategic direction is. Because I feel like in foreign policy, that's also quite, that same sort of lesson that you're telling us now is also coming through. But that being said, it sounds much better than, I think, the view that's just assumed, which is everything's corrupt. It's like one big bubble of corruption, and I think, we need more nuance, first of all, but second of all, I think the news that we get in the diaspora, should feel some bigger sense of responsibility to do some more research and provide some of that background information needed in order for people to be able to have a view on these things, as opposed to, spoon feeding assumptions such as the one we're talking about, which I get it. If you're trying to grow a channel, if you're trying to, become internet famous, make
Yeah.
people angry, make people
We're
upset,
getting it.
make your headlines.
Of course, you have to go.
Yeah. Yeah. So
I have to
just
say,
to quickly, yeah, sorry, Gor.
yeah, I just want to say something very important that we as a society need to remember, everyone talking about the government or etc. or judiciary, that attacking the judicial system in a society, on a societal level, right? The society organized on a state level is about attacking the sense of justice within that society.
Mm.
Because these two are very much interconnected in a society that is organized as a state. Because I might have different feelings about justice on a daily basis, but when it comes to the state and my perception of it and my perception of how I'm organizing my life with it, so doesn't that mean that we have to be quite careful about it? So I think that, trust me, I am in no position to advocate for judicial system. I have no vested interest whatsoever. I personally, my family has gone through a very tough times in their sort of encounter with judicial system. We had a couple of very unfortunate encounters with it. And I have no interest, but at the same time, if you act from a professional, look at the system from professional perspective, then you have to recognize that your government, as you mentioned, it's not really perfect also. Is our government less corrupt? Is our government more efficient? Is our government really delivering the services that we are looking for? Look our parliament. I mean, in the parliament, I hear about everything except the discussion of the substance of law. In very few instances, there have been really discussions on the substance of law that I could listen professionally, have an interest to. I'm sorry, but none of us can actually go and just sit down on a daily basis and read all the drafts of, but we have to have a channel. Okay, you fight there, you tell all the worst things about each other publicly. That's your business, but make sure also that we get some information about what you are deciding there, substance
Yeah.
wise.
Yeah. Look, I think that's it's so important. I think the role more so because obviously, politicians are always going to, play the image over the substance anywhere in the world. I think this is honestly a place for the media environment to really step up and step into. I think people and obviously they all relate to each other, and media is that really important check that gives the information, gives the background, gives the substance, lets you go deeper, and it refreshes the collective mind based on what's topical and what's happening at that moment in time and what you should be paying attention to. We could, obviously we could talk about this
Yeah.
for a very long time, but basically, just to sort of go back to the topic, I think to summarize, I just want to make sure I'm sort of understanding this. So it sounds like the government is prosecuting, a high profile Russian linked billionaire, but there's also lots of other people potentially doing similar things or are prosecutable as well, which they're choosing to ignore at this point in time. Right. So that's dubious item number one.
Yeah.
But what it sounds like is that without some sort of legal framework or legal grounding, none of these prosecutions would be able to take place. So they're not fabricated, based in, something that aligns with the system. And for judicial independence to be sort of understood better, it would be important to basically create the processes that empirically assess the outcomes that are created by the judicial process, not necessarily the way that appointees are given their positions in order to help, draw a line to move forward and to continually, improve and try to hold that line for judicial independence.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Yeah,
Good.
and I
Good to
think
know.
that, but I mean, in general terms, of course, there are a lot of details, and the devil is in detail, of course. But then at the same time, I think that about these high-profile prosecutions and etc., I would say I think they are highly politically charged. That's for sure. But I wouldn't really say that they are absolutely legally grounded, because I mean, we have to wait and see what the judicial system is saying and how is it substantiated. But I'm really looking forward to read the judgments both on the case related to the church leaders and also to Samvel Karapetyan and others high profile. They are now going through the corruption, like this. How is it called? The return of the illegally acquired property or accusation of something like this. There is this process.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
I reckon, and this is, warning, like full speculation, but I always picture myself, if I was in office, what I would be doing at this point in time. And when I heard about the Samvel Karapetyan arrest, like it just seemed so obvious, and I was shocked that it wasn't reported on the news. I was like, obviously they're trying to nationalize the electricity grid so they can do these gigantic AI projects and have stable, controllable electricity. So it's like whatever, if you're in this position of power, there's obviously this moral element that everyone expects, full ethical behavior and full moral behavior, and everyone sort of points big holes in it. But even if you're I think good guy, bad guy, they're trying to get to some sort of outcome, and they've created some grounds to then get the outcome of having Nvidia or these other organizations operating thing. That to me, I don't know, was just a
There is
connection.
Yeah, of course. The reasons do not cancel each other. That might be that reason. Usually, when you read Armenian media, particularly the local media, that's what I sometimes, not always read, because you have to really not be careful about what you are taking in. And then when you are reading this media, you can really see that there is this inclination to give one reason to come up with this answer and solution. Whereas usually there are so many factors at play at the same time that you cannot really try to explain it with one. Of course, this aspect is also there. There's a huge claimed geopolitical shift, which I'm a little bit doubtful, because we will see what is happening with the President Trump and Putin's meeting. But then there is a whole shift going on in the country. And of course, some people are going to go into the grids of this change and not come out of it quite in a way that they were used to be. That's just a part of the game. You just go through because you are in high positions, you occupy certain spaces in those environments. And when the environment changes, of course, the shifts are happening. So I think it's quite normal. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. And I think there's a way to navigate these things through understanding, your own principles or your own sense of right and wrong. And in these instances, these very contentious, constantly huge contentions coming, they did the Jennifer Lopez concert, and straight away the news is like, is this a correct expenditure of money? It's like, I don't know, it's quite a narrow focus. It doesn't take into account other economic benefits and other things that come from that. But that aside, when I look at these sort of high profile cases, I support as a as a person who looks at the policies and cares about the policies, I support things like nationalization of monopoly industries such as utilities, such as, I don't know, airlines or right.
We have long been advocating for it, right? The society was like, we were unhappy with it being under Russia's control for a long time.
Well, yeah, and we've lived with the experiences of having Gazprom control your heating for your house. You much longer than us. But basically, the other value aspect is there's people who are taking the side of essentially Russian oligarchs on a basis of principle, right? So it becomes almost like a parody. It's like, well, and I fully think there's definitely, as you're saying, the systems aren't very well formed, and it's not in the person who's in power's interest to really give those systems strength because it restricts them, right? That's what you were mentioning before. So it's not to say that everything's above board and everything's being done ethically and by the book and the way it should be done. It's, if you look at it from a value standpoint, it's like, well, you could go after someone worse than a Russian oligarch, so to sort of die on that hill of I'm with the billionaires, it's a bit, I think it gets a bit ridiculous at that point.
That's true. Yeah, it's just that, to be honest, we have to really differentiate. For me, when I look at these instances, like not as just like from trying to look at it professionally, I would say, it's really difficult because you're so emotionally involved in that situation. But for me, I think that the question is that, are you really building an institution, or are you really building a process by it? Are you really establishing, or it's just a mere process of decolonizing yourself and being new colonized? Do we really look at ourselves and try to reflect on who we are? Where are we going? Like, just again, going back to the topic of our today's discussion, the judicial independence. We haven't so far answered the question, like I take the responsibility as a professional myself. We haven't really answered that question. So, and then whatever comes and goes and happens and etc., you're just floating and in vertigo, and you are just in this like this huge stream of events in which you are really sort of delusional, because you didn't answer to yourself to many important questions. And the same goes to the economy, the same goes to the utility service. And what is it that we are? So that we can think of ourselves, we can reflect on ourselves. What is our identity? For example, the identity of the judicial system of Armenia. And as a professional community, I think we are responsible for that, to answer that question. Otherwise, I'm very sorry, but we can just talk and talk and talk and talk, discuss and discuss, whereas things are happening in a very rational, reasonable ways, and somehow decided also for us.
Yeah, definitely. I sort of look at it as, when I look at Australia, I think Australia is very, it looks like it's very well defined. A lot of these systems, a lot of these processes, the culture that upholds those systems and processes, it's an island. It's enjoyed a certain level of ability to, grow into itself and grow into its values more so than countries that are, influenced externally. I think with Armenia, a metaphor might be it's sort of a blurry image that's like slowly coming into focus, but no one can really see what it is. Like if you're taking judicial independence as an example, and this is why that whole media thing comes up. It's like there's a certain degree of responsibility to, as you have done, call it out for what it is. I'm not sure. It's not clear where, we need these processes in order to understand, as opposed to this is exactly what it, even though we don't really know, this is exactly what it is. You should feel exactly this way about it, and you should join our political party or whatever the objective is.
Exactly. Yes. I mean, I don't have much to add. I already said it, but I think that if you go out as a media outlet, because trust me, the media outlet is no less important than the independent judiciary. Because if you as a media go out and say, well, this person is being prosecuted for political reason and blah, 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 and you are missing out on the fact that they had stood and made a claim about taking the power, which is democratically elected. And to be very honest, I am not really, again, in support of the current political agenda at all.
Yep.
in many
Yep.
ways. There are some aspects I support, some aspects I don't. Well, that's in the field of my convictions. But what I can really say publicly is that there is a red line for me in every discussion, in every public speech, when you are just trying to sort of feel yourself or position yourself above the Constitution.
Mm.
And this is, I can see it on a daily basis, both those in power and those also in opposition. Just like enough feeling yourself as big guys. Just step a little bit down and have the courage to see yourself as a part of much bigger process, of a much bigger community. And much bigger forces of influence, both from outside and inside. And then you might actually act a little bit less flamboyant, I would say.
Yeah. No, it's such a good good note to end on. It's just unfortunate that the US leading the world is putting that flamboyancy on full display.
Well,
Yeah. But yeah, Gord, thanks so much for your time and your insights. I think what's really important, not just now, but for the foreseeable future, is looking at these, complex topics through the lenses of expertise, giving things, especially academic expertise. It's like giving things that are blurry a frame to begin to examine them closer and closer and closer. So yeah, it's been very insightful for me, and obviously I want to speak to you because I had these questions I'm asking myself when I'm watching the news. So yeah, thanks so much for your time and your insights.
thank you very much for the invitation. And I have the same questions I ask myself the same questions all the time. I hope we were able to discuss and have some perspective on them, but I really don't myself claim to have an exhaustive answer
Right.
for those questions. And thanks for having me. It was a pleasure.
Yeah, of course.
Thank you.